thank you all so much for joining us for this conversation on Earth Day 2022. We have with us, with great pleasure, the board chair of We Do, Sun Young Yoon, and a program manager there as well, Mara Dolan. Thank you both for being with us today. Well, Sun Young and Mara, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation, Earth Day 2022, where really we thought we would have resolved so many of our climate, environmental justice, racism issues. It seems clearly not, although there has been progress. Sun Young, I'll start with you in terms of where you see, what's your assessment of us all globally and in the United States in terms of the climate, in terms of the environment, in terms of justice?
Well, Carol, first of all, I want to congratulate ERA for bringing these two ideas together. I think what's exciting is that it's really timely. And I'm going to quote something which really excited me when I was reading the White House Counsel's report, the National Strategy on Gender Equity and Equality. And I arrived at page 27. And here's what it said. It said, "We will continue to support the Equal Rights Amendment." There you are. Which would make gender equality explicit in the US Constitution, as well as the ratification of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is the UN Women's Human Rights Treaty, a critical tool to advance women's rights around the world. And the reason I love this report, it's well documented, it's well argued, but it understands that the United States has an impact around the world and is connected to international issues. So every time they covered something very relevant to the United States, economic equality, racial inequality, gender equality, social issues like health, they added a section on what this implied for the US international policy. So
right, we of course, yes, and want to be a little bit higher the next time than page 27, but I thank you so much for pointing that out.
Well, that's the first things I go to now. So you are already number one on my set of pages.
I know, thank you. We always complain. Thank you for that. But, subsequently we have moved up in the presidential response. So that's a good sign for the United States.
Very, very good sign. I think that it also feels the temperature of the political waters. I myself, situated here in California, see extraordinary momentum for the ERA plus the CEDAW, the ERA being domestic, the CEDAW being international, but neither is one or the other. It's really important to understand how the rest of the world looks at the United States. And I think many of us forget that I used to say on the economy that when the United States coughs, the world shakes because of the strength of its economy and the strength of its political voice. And small countries watch what is happening here. They're watching you, Carol. They're watching the ERA movement. They're watching the CEDAW movement, and they get inspiration from it, and they feel connected to what is happening here. That sort of led me to the first thing that I kind of wanted to put forward here, which is the idea that sustaining Mother Earth is a feminist issue. It is our issue. Carol, were you at the Beijing Women's Conference in '95?
I was not. I missed it. I was a reporter then, so I followed it very, very closely. Extremely.
Yeah, many people felt they were there, even though they weren't, because it was so media friendly.
Right.
But at that conference, it was a turning point in the UN conferences because we declared, do not put us just in violence against women. Do not put us just in sexual reproductive health and rights. And our slogan was, all issues are women's issues. So we claimed the right to be a political voice, to be a participant in everything that had to do with the future of our lives. So on the climate issue, what I wanted to say is that, keeping the Earth below this 1.5 centigrade degree temperature is something that is going to require gender equality, because we are located in a global ecological system. But with all of our diversity, we are located in different places. So globally, imagine, indigenous women being responsible for biodiversity, which is going to help us. Their responsibility for forests in Brazil is really impacting us. And women who are involved with food production and security and animal husbandry are part of our global food system at this point. And most important, I think, we women, the United States is 83% urban. We in the cities are making major decisions on energy use, consumer products, and most important, we vote. We vote for politicians who understand the problem of the climate emergency. And if we don't pick the right politicians like we did a few years ago, the whole world is in a climate emergency politically. So that is why I think we really have to understand what is at stake here with gender equality is not just women. It is indeed what is going to happen with this global ecology and its health. And so that's sort of the first thing I wanted to connect to. But I find that one of the things that we can understand very clearly is that the climate emergency is also a health emergency for us. So I tell my daughter, that our bodies are 50 or 60% water. We are not self-sustaining. You can't take me off the earth and I won't survive, right? Right, Carol?
Right, exactly. So you're
yeah. So we are an ecological system in microcosm. So our bodies being 50 or 60% water means exactly water safety, access to fresh water. Velu, you are interested in blue economy, in the oceans. Imagine all of the things that affect water and climate justice here. We are also breathing something like 15,000 liters of air every day. The air quality is something which is very affected by climate change, including heat. So what is the injustice is that poor and minority populations in the United States are actually suffering more from pollutants than the rest of the population. And they are more exposed to cancer-causing carcinogens. And because of poverty, they are less able to cope with extreme heat. So if you combine this with the food security issue and just me, right? Me, my body,
right.
I am so connected to the climate. I am so dependent on the decisions that are made by my family, my city, and my government, and by the United Nations at this point. So
right. I want to bring.
Do you agree with that, Carol?
Right. I want to bring Mara in a little bit to talk about WeDo, founded by Bella Abzug, Gloria Steinem, and some other fabulous women who are still a part of, Gloria, who serves on our board here at the RI Coalition. And, this was part of their idea, along with some other wonderful women. Mara, talk to us a little bit about the history of the organization and the current work.
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here as well. By short way of introductions, I'm Mara Dolan. I'm U.S. Program Manager at WeDo, the Women's Environment Development Organization. We know it's a long name, so WeDo also serves as our nickname and hopefully our attitude around how we are really orienting ourselves to so many of these intersecting crises. And as you mentioned, WeDo has a really rich history of a broad, powerful set of feminists 30 or so years ago, really coming out of a diversity of movements and spaces in which they were working in local, regional, and global contexts around gender injustice, environmental injustice, climate injustice, and thinking about the ways that having a global space in which feminists are working in collaboration, are working collectively around shared advocacy goals, in these global policy spaces that we know are not feminist spaces. They are halls of power in which so much injustice is reified and re-entrenched, and in which there is a real need to have folks speaking truth to power and having folks really naming the ways that we have the solutions and we have the path to build a more just world. We have people who are leading the way. We have women and feminists who are leading the way. And the United Nations and global policy spaces that they often create are spaces in which feminist voices are really needed. They are sorely missing. And I think the women who founded We Do were well aware of that and really leading the way in thinking about the ways that I think something that is very inherent to feminism everywhere is the sense that we are more powerful together, and that a single voice in collaboration with many other voices that share goals, that share strategies, that are able to cross-pollinate and share knowledge is able to build a really powerful collective movement. So We Do, yes, came out of this history of transnational feminisms and women working together in different contexts around environment, climate, and gender justice, and really came out of the spaces in which feminists were gathering globally to be speaking truth to power at the United Nations, but also recognizing they needed to take that home to their national governments and be building these feminist climate movements everywhere. So today We Do is still carrying that spirit forward in holding very near and dear to our heart that all of our work must be collective. So I'm happy to talk about some of the things that We Do is doing, and it feels always hard to do that without mentioning really the ecosystem of movements and organizations that we do so within, which is really the space in which I think all of our power is built and born of. So a few of those spaces includes the Women and Gender Constituency. We call them the WGC for short. There's a lot of acronyms in the UN space, as you all are well aware of, and unfortunately we only add more to it. And the Women and Gender Constituency is one of the 9 recognized civil society constituencies under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is a real mouthful, but is basically the space in which national governments are coming together every year to think about and assess progress in how they are addressing the global climate crisis. So the Women and Gender Constituency is a global collective of women and feminists all over the world who have a shared feminist analysis around where and how the UNFCCC needs to really be thinking about gender justice at its core in order to address climate injustice. And so the Women and Gender Constituency, which We Do as a proud member of, pushes that work forward at Conference of the Parties. In the US, I would love to bring into the conversation the Feminist Green New Deal Coalition, which very similarly is gathering women and feminist organizations across the US to be thinking about how we use this framework of a Green New Deal in the US, the discourse and all of the excitement and momentum around what a Green New Deal means here in the US. We're in this really exciting moment in which I think we're really figuring that out together as a movement, as folks who care about ensuring that our commitment to address the climate crisis has justice at its core. Folks are really thinking about what that Green New Deal can mean, and the Feminist Green New Deal Coalition is wanting to make sure that feminism is also at its core.
All right, I want to stop you there because I understand that you actually have an app. We're going to send people to your website so that you can track, the Green New Deal. But I want to go back for a minute to the United Nations, because I know the Commission on the Status of Women, there was this entire concentration on the climate, on the environment. And when I was reading some of the feedback from what actually happened there, I got the impression you are not very pleased. Sun Young, let me start with you and get your reaction to all of these women, who have all of these fantastic ideas. And tell us what you thought the response to the governments around the world was to your suggestions.
Well, let me talk about the plus side first, if you don't mind, because we on the NGO side are different from the government side. On the NGO side, imagine we had 800 different events last year we could count, we had more than 27,000 participants. And this year that means it was probably there. So the CSW in many ways for me was exciting because it was a turning point where the feminist movement and the climate justice movement could actually talk to each other in 800 events. So that's the NGO side. The government side, we were very disappointed to many parts of the what we call the agreed conclusions, which is the outcome document from that, because the language is softened up. It is, you know, rather than really commitments to and a way forward, it's, you know, according to national priorities or according to the possibilities that are at national level. I think the important thing for us is to take the CSW to other places. That's to take what we've learned to the place that Mara just mentioned, which is to the Women's Constituency, because that is another process that's going to happen. CSW happens once a year. The rest of the stuff is going on, you know, high-level political forum on the Sustainable Development Goals and all of the meetings related to climate. So I think we just need to salvage what we can from each of those and bring it to the next CSW. What do you think,
So Mara, was it that the governments were saying, a great idea, it's just too expensive, too costly to our bottom lines in order to take care of the environment in this way?
There's a real resistance. There's a real resistance, I think, from national governments in many of the global policy spaces that we're in to really accept the scale of change and transformation that the crisis demands, both in science and through the lens of justice. And so I think, you know, though some countries, and I will call out the US here, are more significant blockers of progress than others. It feels as though often civil society are the voices of reason in those spaces. And civil society, especially feminist civil society, is so often leading the call. And in particular, in that voice of civil society, Indigenous leadership, Black women's leadership, leadership from the Global South, and young people are often the folks who are really pushing governments to do more. And I think though that looks different in different spaces and different global policy conversations have different inhibitors to progress, essentially what we are seeing is civil society raising the alarm over and over again, and also putting forward the solutions for what we need governments to do now. It is not that we do not have a framework or clear action steps or the demands laid out, because we have them 10 times over, but we are seeing a real unwillingness to recognize the kinds of economic, political, and social transformation that is needed to address the climate crisis. Because at the end of the day, when we are talking about addressing the climate crisis, we are also talking about addressing white supremacy, addressing colonialism, addressing extractivism. And that's something that we're unwilling to not accept. And governments are thinking that small incremental change will get us where we need to go. And feminist civil society is just not having it. So I think maybe one example here of bringing something specific to CSW that Soon Young made me think of as well is, you know, right before the Commission on the Status of Women this year, we saw another big report. They're called the Ipcc reports, that are essentially these massive intergovernmental panel on climate change authored reports that are assessing the science of climate change in this current moment and issuing clear analysis and recommendations for governments of where we are at in the climate crisis. And this year was actually the first year that colonialism was listed in the Ipcc report as a root cause of the climate crisis. And civil society has been naming that, Indigenous folks have been naming that for generations, but it was a really powerful step to see that in this huge intergovernmental document. But that's not where the conversation is at with countries like the US, who are such inhibitors of progress in that global space and are unwilling to think about the ways that connections to colonialism and addressing colonialism and colonial legacies are a part of what we need to see in climate action.
Now, it's so interesting, colonialism, like patriarchy as well, right? So Young, I know that, you know, the fact that we still don't have an Equal Rights Amendment, we still don't have CEDAW, and we still have opposition to actually changing the climate or making the changes that we need to save our climate. You know, what's your assessment of that? Why?
time's a wasting. What can I say? I mean, why doesn't action happen? I'm going to go back to a root cause. I'm going to go back to a root cause, which is we women need to end this violence against women. And I say that because I see that as a real structural barrier to the kind of acceleration of progress that we need, because the threat of violence against women, say against political leadership, we have documented it is rampant and it is designed to silence us. So without addressing some of those root structural causes like violence against women, in particular women in politics, getting women into politics, I think that we are not able to really talk about this importance of how our participation is actually going to make the difference. Speaking from where we are is going to help accelerate and scale up what we need on this climate justice issue. And really, the diversity issue is core. The race issue, the class issue, the occupational segregation issue, where women are working, men are working, they see things differently. We are part of the unpaid care economy, which is supporting all the rest of it, and we're not getting the free healthcare that we need to be able to do our jobs. All of that is something which is holding us back. So we need to free the democratic voices of women and bring them into this conversation. And as Mara said, we guarantee that is going to make the difference.
So Earth Day 2022, where we still have, these, devastating discriminatory situations, of people living without clean water. And I'm talking about in the United States, we always mark and celebrate Water Day, around the world, but in this country as well, so many people who do not have clean water or a place to live, who are living in cancer alleys, just the on and on degradation of human beings around the world. Are you optimistic on Earth Day of 2022 that we will make these changes? And what do you see as the crucial thing? And I know it's getting women involved, and how exactly do we make those next steps? Mara, and then we'll let Sun Young close us out. Mara, what do you think?
No, thank you. It's a huge question, and it's something that I think about a lot. I mean, I think really when I ask myself what it feels like, the key challenge to political leadership heeding the will of the people of civil society, of our movements for justice, it is ultimately a question of power, right? It is a question of how, and this is something that I think an intersectional feminist analysis really allows us to see is we're able to use a power lens when we're thinking about the causes of the climate crisis. And it helps us identify the causes as being white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy. And I think what makes me optimistic is that it feels as though Earth Day is one day of the year, and I know our movements for justice do not rest. There are days that are celebratory and days in which there is rich history of all of the marches and mobilizations that Earth Day has catalyzed. And the struggle carries on throughout the year. And I think there is a greater willingness and openness to be naming white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy as key blockades to addressing the climate crisis, and an understanding that putting justice at the core of our climate action is the only way to go. And I think something else that I always fall back on is a quote that a journalist who I really admire, I know we were just speaking about your writing previously, Carol, but a journalist who I really admire, who I think has covered the climate crisis in an absolutely transformative way, is named Mary Heglar, and she wrote in a piece a couple of years ago, "We live today in an age of crisis conglomeration. It's no longer useful or honest or even smart to look at any of them through a single lens." And I think something that makes me optimistic is that feminists, intersectional feminists, are so used to working at the intersections of crises. We're so used to thinking about the ways that systems of oppression intersect and shape lived experiences. And so we are in this age of crisis conglomeration, and I think we have the tools and the analysis and the movements to really lead the way in thinking about how to move forward. So that makes me optimistic.
Powerful, powerful. Sun Young.
Well, again, I want to congratulate ERA. I mean, you know, putting these two movements together, this is where we're going to get innovation. We have a movement of equality, which your coalition has. We have a movement with a lot of youth in the environment movements. They take the youth movement, the environment movement, and let's bring also the mayors of cities into this from around the world. We have social movements that need to get together. And I think what you're doing with the ERA is providing an umbrella for that. And so I would say keep doing that. It's going to help open the doors. And I think you're on the right path. Congratulations.
Well, thank you both so much for being with us today, celebrating Earth Day, and for all of the work you do every single day, 365 days of the year. We're so grateful to have you with us in our work and to join you in your work.
Thank you. Thanks to you all as well. It's been really lovely.